Okay, so speaking to CBS Sports, Paul Heyman had this to say: because of the longevity that the storyline has had, I would have to rank it number one. The money drawing years of the Horsemen weren't this long. The money drawing years of the NWO weren't this long. The money drawing years of Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon weren't this long. Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage, Hogan versus Roddy Piper, which put WrestleMania 1 on the map, just in terms of the overall storytelling and constant ebb and flow affecting other people's environment and how they tell their stories. I would suggest it's the most significant. It's the biggest money drawing. It had the most longevity, has held the most interest, and overall has done so by being the most intriguing and compelling because at every turn you see the characters not just turn towards what the story calls for, but the long term effects of the development and evolution of these characters is never lost on us. If something happens that changes Roman Reigns in 2022, we don't disavow knowledge of it in 2024. It plays into what's happening in 2024 because of that, and because we keep it consistent. I would rank it number one. All false humility aside. So, Paul Heyman makes a case. He makes a case talking about longevity, and I think, especially in the wrestling business, longevity does matter. Because the bottom line is the wrestling business, unlike a season, in like the NFL or the NBA, an NFL team wins a championship, that team lives on forever in infamy. But in WWE, there's not an end to the season. WrestleMania, I guess, is the end. But at the same time, it's like people are kind of like, what have you done for me lately? So when longevity matters in that sense, the only pushback is I'm trying to think of a devil's advocate to what he's saying is I just don't know, when you talk about Hulk Hogan, or you talk about, Steve Austin and Vince, that rivalry. I just feel like the mainstream appeal, like for wrestling fans, the Bloodline storyline is off the charts. And I think even to people who maybe got, disillusioned with wrestling and then they came back and, saw the Bloodline storyline, I think all of those people, it may be the best ever, because it's so interesting and it's doing so much for them. The question I have is, does the Bloodline storyline, is it reaching mainstream appeal in the same way that, like, Austin Vince, even maybe Hogan is an even better example of that way back, because it was a different, the business was viewed differently, and he was kind of the solo star in a way. WWE was huge, but Hogan was by far and away the biggest name. I don't know if you look at today's WWE, that the Bloodline storyline has that type of control over the whole company. Like that rivalry dominates that much. Like Steve Austin and Vince, I mean, that was the biggest thing. There's no question. But at the same time, it's tough to argue because the beauty of this thing is that even you take the titles out of it, there's no titles up for grabs in, this War Games match, and yet it's going to be the most exciting thing that night. And so it's just everything about it is great. And so you kind of have to tip the cap. It's one of those things that you almost go, who cares if it's the best storyline ever? Because it's just great, and that's really at the end of the day, all that matters. It could be the 10th greatest storyline in WWE history. And if it's this good, nobody will care, where it ranks. So I don't blame Paul Heyman for, giving it the number one spot, because I do think based off longevity, I can't think of one that had the staying power that this did, and that's unreal. So thank you all for watching.